let's move on, because 3 years on from the lifting of the final lockdown measures, a campaign group has found that the UK was one of the least effective spenders in terms of limiting excess deaths.
So, was it all for nothing? Well, joining us now is the head of campaigns at the TaxPayers Alliance, Elliot Keck. Good morning, Elliot. Thank you for joining us. So, your figures, it's around, what, 3.5 billion, is that correct, you think has gone to waste during COVID? I thought the figure was going to be vastly, bigger than that. For test and trace, for example, was 37 billion.
Yeah, well, so the 3.5 billion, I think, specifically looking at fraud and those measures, the 37 billion on test and trace, a lot of that was actually spent on COVID testing. Whether or not it was the best use of money is, of course, debatable. But listen, obviously, we saw the COVID inquiry yesterday, produced a report slamming the government and slamming the response to COVID. We've produced another one today. It didn't cost taxpayers tens of millions of pounds to produce like the one yesterday, but nevertheless, I think what it shows is that we spent an absolutely vast amount of money. We locked down people for a year and a half, and yet actually the result was that a lot more people died in the UK than other comparable nations. So we were one of the least efficient countries in comparable OECD nations at actually preventing excess deaths.
Could that not be partly to do with our own healthcare systems as well? So, for example, the NHS is overrun. We are not efficient in treating many conditions anyway. We are probably now one of the worst for treatments like cancer. So could it not be simply that the demise of our own healthcare system and not necessarily fully the fault of COVID?
Well, listen, that's going to be an absolutely key factor. But I think when we're talking about lockdowns and when we're talking about the COVID response, something that unfortunately the inquiry has not touched on that significantly yet, we need to provide a really serious justification for taking people's civil liberties away for such a long period of time. And when you look at the excess deaths in the UK, the third highest in the 7 comparable nations that we looked at, we obviously performed very poorly at a huge cost.
But didn't some of those nations do exactly what we're doing? They just had a slightly better outcome. So what we did was very similar to what they did. So,
yes, with France and Germany, but the United States operated quite differently. There were some parts of the United States that had quite strict lockdowns, some that didn't. Particularly look at Florida and Texas, but actually Norway and Sweden had comparatively light lockdowns. Sweden basically didn't lock down at all, and yet it was one of the better performers in terms of excess deaths.
OK, interesting stuff. Thanks very much for joining us.
Elliot Keck, really good to talk to you. Thank you for that.